Oh man, this is great. They gave me the after lunch crowd. We're gonna have some fun. Now, we're gonna do things a little bit different for those of you that have never been to any of my talks before. So let's go ahead and do this, set this off right. If you see my slide here, let's go back to number 1. QR code. Let's go ahead and give that a quick scan. We're gonna have some fun as we go along through this. Once again, my name is Michael Liendo, Senior Developer Advocate over at AWS. Come on, take a seat, it's all good. And everywhere online, you can find me at Focus Order. But today we're gonna be talking about SaaS applications. Now, I need to go off script a little bit. Atlanta men. I don't know if you follow me on Twitter or not, but Atlanta men, I don't know how you date any Atlanta woman here, because one, they're on a whole nother level. I just realized. My Uber driver is a CEO and founder. Every woman that I talk to is a CEO and founder. Man, you gotta I don't know what it's like to be here, but I'm glad that I'm married, I'm not part of that game anymore, because it's tough. So let's talk about maybe how we can get you to that level. If you are unfamiliar with AWS, we're gonna be talking about a core set of services here. Now we have a bunch of services that you can dive into, but today we're gonna be talking about 6, 7, and then of course, how do we get paid? How do we make money with all of this? So quick little overview, here's the boring slide. Once again, Michael Liendo, everywhere online at Focus Order. If you ever need work done, you can honestly pay me in tacos, because that's my thing. So, avid taco eater, I'm a foodie, I love cocktails, but yeah, I appreciate the emojis, but that's not the kind of tacos I'm talking about. So as we go through today, we're really gonna be talking about how do you build a SaaS application, okay? These are gonna be the core set of services, things that the big dogs use. What's interesting though, is that it doesn't have to be just for the millionaires. It doesn't just have to be for the Series C. Okay, this can take you to a series round, this can take you from a bootstrapped round. We're really gonna be targeting your first 100 to 1,000 customers and what that looks like and how it scales as you go beyond that. We do have a quick little demo at the end, but the core of today's session is really gonna be diving into the services, getting you to understand the fundamentals and how you can take that and apply it into your own applications. Now, when it comes to building out a SaaS application, we can go into a million different directions. Because I'm going to be focusing on getting started and helping you sort of get bootstrapped in that first set of customers, we're going to be breaking this down into a micro SaaS application. What that means is that we're going to be targeting the $5,000 to $10,000 MRR, that monthly recurring revenue. And we're going to see if we can get you footed into that ground. Typically, with 100 customers at the right pricing model and the right services, easily doable. But this set of services that we're going to be talking about today, super popular in the indie hacker community. But this picture right here, I really resonated because this is me. Okay? I was that scientist focusing on front-end development, mixing colors, trying to get my pixels right, and there was always this scary kraken in the back, known as the back end. Right? I didn't want to touch it. And it turns out with AWS, they offer a core set of services that make it so that you don't have to. Now, micro SaaS applications, you've seen this a million times. Okay? You've seen this screen. Hey, pay monthly, go ahead and get a discount if you pay yearly. And then we have a basic, a pro plan, and perhaps maybe contact us if you want enterprise support. This is what we're talking about today. So, what services do most SaaS applications need, right? Those software as a solution or as a service applications. Turns out there's quite a bit to consider. I mean, there's sign in, sign out, forgot password. How does this scale, right? File storage. Then there's also database storage. And then at the core of it all, we need to have an API that glues everything together. All tech aside, you also have the marketing aspect of it all, right? Putting this out there so that your customers see it. Because the worst thing that you can do, and the thing that a lot of beginner SaaS founders make, is that they build in silence. They sit there for a year, and then all of a sudden there's a tweet, and it's like, hey, I built this. And it's like, nobody uses it, right? Because you have to be marketing all along. We're gonna save that for another conversation. Today is all about the tech side of things, but keep in mind that both of those are gonna go hand in hand as you start to deploy this. Now, no shade. and I want to protect the identity of the innocent, okay? But there are ways where you cannot use maybe AWS, and you can give your credit card or you can sign up for the free trial for every service under the sun to get your application on the ground. And I put this in red because sincerely, right, this is a way of doing things. I don't know if it's the best way, but it is a way, and a lot of founders find success in doing so. I'm sure some of you are smart enough where you can kind of decipher what it is under the red scores, but it's all good. So why not that approach? Okay. Well, it turns out there's some considerations and some trade-offs that you have to think about. Okay. That approach is very quick and easy to get set up. It's simple, it's powerful. Typically, because they're laser focused on one thing, take authorization and authentication as an example, the DX experience is great. The free tiers are great. And the pricing models are attractive and allow you to get started again very easily and very quickly. Let's maybe talk about the cons for a little bit. If you have to stitch together many third-party providers for your application, you now have many points of failure. How do you handle that? Well, typically to integrate it, you have to do so manually. And then if one service goes down, that logic also has to be a manual process. Okay, if my authorization and authentication goes down or my payment processor goes down, what happens in my app? So that manual stitching of services is there. And then also costs can escalate quickly because if you have an attractive pricing model to bring users in, what happens when they need a feature that you don't offer? Or what happens when you scale beyond that initial pricing tier? Definitely something to consider. So this is what we're proposing today. This is going to be the micro SaaS stack from AWS. This is what I see a lot of customers using in the real world, very similar to what we have today. Up front, we have Cognito. In the middle, we have AppSync, and we're going to be talking about these services as we go along. And then we have a few Lambda functions throughout the way, a user table, and then we're going to have essentially a SaaS table. Okay. In this application, we're imagining that we have a travel post application. But there's one thing I want to point out. Outside of that main rectangle, you might see a logo that you recognize, and that's going to be Cloudinary. So we have S3, CloudFront, that's going to be our CDN, and then we do have Cloudinary. I just threw that in there to emphasize the fact that even though I'm proposing this AWS solution, it doesn't mean that it has to be all of AWS. This isn't an all or nothing conversation. It's more of a better together scenario. So I gave you the pros and cons of the last one. Let's talk about AWS for a second. Quick to set up. Some of you are like, I don't know about that. We're going to talk about some services that make it easier, and then I'm just going to plug myself from the get-go. Like, follow me. I got all the videos and blog posts to help you get started. But no, actually, a lot has come a long way. When I first started, getting started with AWS was tough. It was painful. And even though I work for them now, I can still see how customers struggle, especially with the pricing model of a lot of these services. It's hard to predict what the cost can be. But there are simple integrations that help you. When we have serverless and managed services, the pricing model becomes very attractive. We're talking pennies per thousands of invocations, things of that nature. But we also have cons as well, and a lot of you, as you joked earlier, are aware of those. Right? A single point of failure. So what if AWS goes down? Like, my application is done. Some of you laugh because you already know, if AWS goes down, that's okay, because you're in good hands, because a third of the world basically just went down. So your to-do application is going to be okay. Manual stitching of services, that's still going to be a thing, right? We're putting together a bunch of AWS services, but we have to glue them together still. Now, fortunately, AWS, because it has so many services, it has a service that'll do that for you. But there is the learning investment, and this is probably going to be the biggest factor when it comes to choosing a cloud provider. This is cloud agnostic, not particular to AWS, but you do have to upskill and get yourself acquainted with how AWS or any service does things. But I get it. AWS has over 200 services, so things can get out of hand pretty quickly. This is, in fact, half of AWS's services. I couldn't fit them all into one screenshot. So it's tough, right? AWS wasn't designed for the front-end developer. Let's just be real about it. It was designed for back-end engineers infrastructure engineers. Front-end developers, we kind of came later. Fair enough. But that doesn't mean that there's not a place for us. And again, I consider myself a front-end developer, even though I work across the stack. So instead of clicking through the console, AWS had a service. This is called CloudFormation. Okay? It allowed you to script things together. It was tough. It was YAML. As a front-end developer, it's not sexy to me. I'm kind of spoiled, where I'm used to having this really great DX as a front-end developer. It's just something we're used to. So we don't want to write this anymore. So recently, we introduced the AWS Cloud Development Kit. It allows front-end developers to write their code in JavaScript or TypeScript, but we're all cool and better than JavaScript developers, so we write in TypeScript. And this is how you would do the following, or what we did on the previous slide. I'm creating a database, so I can hold my structured data, and I'm creating an S3 bucket, so I can hold things like files, CSVs, PDFs, etc. Right? 4 lines of code for one liner for the other. I prefer it this way. So what AWS services does every SaaS application need? And this is pretty much like every SaaS application. Okay? Let's talk about that for a second. Well, if we look back at that architecture diagram, I know I'm going to need an API. Now, in this case, I'm going to be using GraphQL, and there's a very specific reason why I'm choosing GraphQL. They paid for me to be here. But no, in all reality, GraphQL is going to allow us to stitch together a bunch of different services into our applications. We can get into the benefits of GraphQL. Just know that for now, AppSync is a service that is managed GraphQL, meaning I don't even have to set up a GraphQL server. There's a bunch of other niceties that come along with that as well. But right out of the gate, I'm choosing to host my application, or at least build my front-end application with Next.js. This is preferential. You don't have to do it. But I prefer Next.js these days. In addition, we have the amplified JavaScript libraries. These are going to be the bindings. Okay, I have my front end, I have my back end. How do I make them talk to each other? There's an NPM package that'll do that for us. When we talk about the AWS side of things, in particular, we have Cognito right out of the gate. Very attractive service. It can be tricky because, again, it wasn't initially developed with the front-end developer in mind. It was all back-end authorization and authentication. I'll show you how we can get that set up for front-end development. In addition, we have DynamoDB as our NoSQL database, Liendo functions in the mix, and then we talked about S3 earlier when we had the previous slide. But wait a minute. I said we're talking about AWS services, but at some point, you have to make money, right? Well, Stripe isn't an AWS service, but it is an AWS partner. And what that means is that it does directly integrate with a bunch of our existing ecosystem. Now, I just happen to like Stripe. Okay? You can use whatever you want, Braintree, PayPal, Lemon Squeezy. There's a million out there, and they're popping up every day. But if we use Stripe in this example, it does give us some niceties. We get a pricing table that we can use in our React application out of the box. We get webhooks so that we can be notified in our AWS backend when things happen, like a payment is being submitted, canceled, verified, etc. But the actual AWS services, well, Cognito is probably going to be our first one. We need a way to have our users sign in, sign up, etc. And this is how you would use it in the CDK. What is this? 15 lines of code, and it's doing a lot. Okay. I have a way to talk to my database when a user signs up, because my database is going to, or Cognito is going to store things like their username, their email. But I want to have things like what plan are they a part of? Well, in that case, have that manual logic applied, I'm going to have a Lambda trigger. Fire off a serverless function, so that way it can talk to my database and store that additional information. I want to automatically verify them and have things like account recovery and user verification. And the beauty of having this all in TypeScript is that I get autocomplete. So I'm not actually memorizing all of this. I'm literally doing things like command space to see what options pop up. And I see some heads nodding in the crowd. It's like, yeah, that's the beauty of TypeScript. That's the back end. If we look at the front end, this is how we would apply it. Using the amplified JavaScript libraries again, we're looking at 3 lines of code, import it, bring in the CSS, and then wrap the component that you want to have authentication applied to. This is going to give us a nice sign-in component right out of the box. So email, password, forget password flows, create account flows. Very, very easy to get set up in your applications today. Fire. So we have a way to authenticate into our application. We're going to skip over the API. We're going to come back to that one. But then we also have a database. Right? We need a way to store things like product information, user information, etc. In the application demo that we have later on, we're going to be talking about recipes. That data has to be stored somewhere. Now the initial part, and this is actual production code that I pulled from my repo, the initial part is creating the database. Okay? It's saying I want a way to have this billing mode that scales automatically with me. That's what we're seeing on that pay per request. Okay? Now I can fine-grain that and say, well, I actually want to provision it with this many units and this read and write capacity. When you're starting off, you don't know those things yet. So I can set it to be on demand. Now, I want to say I have a bunch of recipes in my application, and I want to list them out by their ID. That's great. But what happens later on when I want to get a bunch of recipes per user? Okay, that's a different access pattern. And the beauty of using something like DynamoDB is that I also get the ability to do that by setting up what's called a global secondary index. Essentially, here's my table, and just rework it so that my users can have a different set of access patterns. Very, very convenient. And of course, the 50 gigs of data each month is pretty attractive as well. But the star of the show, right? This is the team that I'm on. We are a managed GraphQL service. It's AppSync, no servers to set up. We take care of all that for you. All the scaling takes place on our behalf, not yours. And we manage what is called undifferentiated heavy lifting. Basically, we'll take care of the hard stuff, and then you focus on your business logic. That's the core of AWS, but we take that to heart on the AppSync team. Bunch of services that you get for free if you're in the free tier, but the benefit of using AppSync, in my opinion, the biggest benefit, is that you get 2 endpoints out of the gate. You get an HTTPS endpoint, secure WebSocket. That way you can have your queries and mutations be applied. But then you also get a WebSocket endpoint. And this is great because this is actually how the emojis are coming through on the slides, is that I have a WebSocket set up with AppSync. See, we're just going to bring it full circle. But as you can see, if you are unfamiliar with GraphQL and you're familiar with TypeScript, the barrier to entry is actually really small. Okay, we're going to have a query, we're going to have a mutation, you list your operations in there. If you're coming from the REST world, these are your gets, posts, deletes, etc. And then we just dictate the type of data, so we have type safety within our application. In this example, we have a recipe with a bunch of parameters as well. But one of the cool things about using AWS services is that they talk to one another. So you might see that at AWS Cognito user pool. That's a directive. That directive is saying no one can use this endpoint unless they are verified in my application. That one little snippet does all of that. Super cool. When it comes to creating the actual API itself, of course, we got to point it to our schema, and then we set those authorization modes. In this example, I have 2. One going to be with my Cognito user pool that I just created, and then the other one is going to be with identity and access permissions. Essentially, if you are if you're a user who hasn't signed into my application, what can you do? More than often than not, this is going to be listing recipes. For example, say you don't want your users to have to sign in just to see what recipes are there. Makes sense. But if they want to create them, then they have to be a part of that. So what does it look like when we go sort of full circle with all of this? Well, using the AWS CLI, we can take our schema and we'll automatically create all of the queries, mutations, subscriptions, so that we don't have to write that ourselves. Because if you've ever had to do that before, it's super error prone and not the most fun thing to do. And then when it comes to listing this out in our front-end application, that snippet that you see on the bottom will allow us to do so. It's a one-liner, but I broke it into a couple of different lines, so that way you can await the response with GraphQL, and then pass in that query in this example, listing the recipes. So I think we're at the point, and again, this is chalking it up to the internet connection. Let's go ahead and run through a demo and see what we have. What does this look like when we put it all together? So I'm here. This is an application that I developed. Again, this is using Next.js, Tailwind, TypeScript, And we are making recipes. This is gonna be Otterlicious recipes. Typical flow that you've, again, seen a couple times. You have your hero image at the beginning. Scrolling down, you have, a fact sheet that talks about all the benefits of using your application. Going down some more, typically you would do like a testimonial. I'm throwing in placeholder stuff. Then you have your footer. Right? Bread and butter, easy to do, front-end application landing page. Now, as a user though, if I click on My Recipes or Sign Up, this will take me to a pricing page. Now, I didn't style this at all just to show you what you get out of the box. But using Amplify, you can use their built-in components, you can use their API libraries to get as fine-grained as you want. Okay, moment of truth. Let's go ahead and go and let's create an account. We're gonna say that this is going to be focus, Otter, maybe 2. Here we go, social security number. Got it. And let's say plus render. So, of course that user already exists. Come on, 23. Cool. Awesome. It says it sent me a confirmation code. Now, notice what I didn't do, okay? I set up Cognito. Cognito automatically is going to use another AWS service to send me an email. It's another benefit of using these services. Code that we're going to be rocking with today is going to be 797174. All right, navigating me back to my application, I have Stripe set up. Using Stripe, and this is their built-in pricing page, I can pick the trial that I want to be a part of. In this case, we're going to go ahead and go with the basic plan, which takes us to Stripe Checkout. Using Stripe Checkout, if you know, you know. We're going to drop in a bunch of 4.2s. And if you don't know, that's just what they expect to make sure that my credit card doesn't get declined, I guess. I don't know. Okay, let's go with New York. Awesome. Looks like it's processing, and again, hopefully, like, my card doesn't get declined. That'd be embarrassing. Once this gets done, I'm subscribed. This means 2 things. This means that I have a plan in my Stripe dashboard, but then also I have a user in my DynamoDB table. Those 2 have to be in sync. The way to verify that is if I go back to my application, in testing, I don't have the callback set up. So let's go to localhost 3001. And now we get a different top-level experience, right? When I authenticated inside of my application, Amplify went ahead and stored all of my credentials in local storage, so that way it pulls up and it knows, hey, we have an actual user here. So I can do a couple things. I can log out. In my case, though, I'm going to create a recipe. Now, this image component is given to me by Amplify. This is the default. Let me just cancel out of here. This is the default experience. It automatically gives me a way to upload a file, CSV, image, etc., up to, and I just had to look this up the other day, 50 terabytes of data from the front end, okay? Now, some of you are like, oh my, like, why would you do that? Well, in the world of AI, like, believe me, it can get ridiculous, right? But this is something that you can't do with a lot of other services because they use a Lambda function in the middle. So now they're constrained by that architecture design. With us, we can go directly to S3 and split it up into chunks. So that way you're not uploading actually 50 terabytes. You have multiple chunks of data being sent. All right, recipe that we're going to be working with. We're in Atlanta, right? So chicken and waffles is what we have. This is going to be the RenderATL Waffle House. Description, this is just going to be an amazing recipe. Maybe with some fire. Servings, I mean, I'm going to eat the whole thing myself, to be honest. Ingredients, let's not get too creative here, right? We're going to need chicken and we're going to need waffles. Cool. Steps to create it, like, you know the drill. Cool. Moment of truth. When I submit this, I should have a couple of things happen, okay? This should go stored inside of my database. This image is actually already uploaded to S3, but I need the key of that image stored in my database as well, okay? That way I have a way to reference this information and not just make that double call to S3, if that makes sense. So once I submit this, if everything went successful, yay, we get confetti. But the actual moment of truth is if I go to my recipes, I should see all of this information here. And there we go. You can see it did in fact have to load this. If I inspect the network tab, just to show you that this is live data. Give this a quick refresh to pull it again. There we go. And then we have our payload on one of these. The response. There we go. And we see we have an ID. This is coming from our database. And then this is what I was talking about in terms of keeping it in sync. We have to store the key of the image on our database. So that way when we make a call, we can call the information from DynamoDB, which then calls S3 to grab that relevant image. Okay. Now this isn't optimized in the way that Cloudinary would do it. So this would be a use case where I would pull in a third-party provider or use other AWS services to wire that up manually. Personally, I would just use Cloudinary. It just makes my job easier. But yeah, this is how you would do all of that. And so as we wrap things up, okay, I want to have a quick word, and this is, I'm going to have to like bring it down a little bit. Okay. So when it comes to creating a SaaS app in today's economy, okay, I've had too many friends log into their Slack accounts and be denied access. Okay. I've had friends check their emails, and all of a sudden their emails were gone and they were no longer permitted. Right? It's tough being in tech these days. So even though I showed that initial slide of creating a SaaS application by stitching together a bunch of services, if you do it that way, great, no harm, no foul. Okay. If you use AWS services to do it, I promise you, you will make the scalability that much more easier. But you have folks like me in the community to help you out if you get stuck. Either way, I think the core message here is that we should all be empowered, even though we work inside of big tech companies. We should all be empowered to have our own income, whether that be passive income, a side hustle, our own thing. That's the real takeaway from today's message. So if I can help you out in any way with that, I think we'll all be better off for it. My name is Michael Liendo. I want to thank you for your time. Hope you enjoy the rest of Render.